Hello and welcome to the studio session. We are coming to you on the sidelines of the Jakarta Futures Forum 2025, where we are having a discussion on the post-2030 development dilemma, a topic that is of critical importance to Indonesia, to India and the rest of the world. My name is Sunaina Kumar and I am Director at the Center for New Economic Diplomacy at the Observer Research Foundation. And it is my privilege to be joined today by Alexandra Kemileska, Partnership Specialist, UNICEF ITU GIGA Program, United Nations. Welcome, Alexandra.
Thank you.
And by Judith Mwaniki, Program Manager, Food Security, Kenya. Welcome, Judith.
Thank you.
We have just 5 years left to attain the Sustainable Development Goals. And we know that progress on development has stalled since the start of this decade with the COVID-19 pandemic, and also with all the spiraling crises that have followed since then. And that brings us to some critical questions that must be addressed. What can be achieved in the next 5 years to accelerate progress until 2030? The world will need funding to tackle climate crisis, digital divides, and rising inequalities. Can we find new ways of financing development? And most importantly, the Global South, which is the most affected by these crises, will need to not just have a seat on the table, but also to design and drive the next agenda. In this session, we will explore the critical ideas that the world will need for post-2030 to ensure that the promise of SDGs to leave no one behind is fulfilled. I'd like to begin with you, Alexandra. Of course, we're at a time in the world where resources are limited and global crises are spiraling. I do not even need to name them. There are food shortages, there's inflation, there's energy crisis, supply chain disruption. And these are straining the ability of institutions and multilateral groupings to respond effectively to the crisis. What do you think can be done to turn this around and also to dispel the gloom that we feel?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for this question. First, I would like to thank the organizers for having me and highlighting that all the views that I'm sharing here are not representing the views of the agency I work for, UNICEF. So to reply to your question, I think it is important, first of all, to put things into perspective and also analyze the context that we had in 2015 when Agenda 2030 was adopted, as well as during its early years of implementation. So in 2015, we had Barack Obama as a president who is still a champion of multilateralism. Notably, he supported very much climate, and Paris Climate Agreement was adopted. But the world was also recovering from economic crisis at that time. We also faced a lot of conflicts, right? So Syria's civil war that led to 4 million refugees, Yemeni civil war that was one of the worst humanitarian crises in the world, as well as conflicts in South Sudan. So still, Agenda 2030, the goal of Agenda 2030 at that time was to create a momentum despite those circumstances, and create a bold aspirational vision. So in 2015, this started to erode with Donald Trump's first term and America's first doctrine. Which led also to cutting of the funding to different UN agencies, but mostly those working on SDG 4 and SDG 5, which is gender equality and education. But I feel that global community responded at that time. So despite the not that much favorable political context, and NGOs, academia, global philanthropy started to work together, building partnerships. So towards SDG 17, private sector also stepped in and started to align their corporate social responsibility strategies with SDGs. So what has changed now in comparison to that time? well, we have Donald Trump again. So I think we are also a little bit more prepared for what is to come. The cutting of the funding to UN agencies shouldn't come as a surprise. We knew it would happen as it happened in 2017. We do have a little bit different context when it comes to the number of crises. We live in a world of polycrisis, as we can call it, with decreasing trust in international institutions. But again, there are several signs of hope as we had in 2017. So first of all, as Samir mentioned yesterday, while global governance is on holidays, regional frameworks are stepping in. So we see increased cooperation, increased South-South cooperation, and regional frameworks such as ASEAN that are aligning their strategies with a development agenda. We also see tech advances and civic engagement. So what else can be done to create this momentum or to make sure that we don't lose it? Several ideas. First of all, I would say focus on coalition building around specific issues. One example of a coalition building could be an initiative I work for, which is GIGA, a joint UNICEF-ITU initiative that pulls together different actors and leverages especially middle powers, such as Spain, that increased or even tripled the funding to some UN agencies since 2017. Secondly, I think moving beyond state-centric models and include more local, regional level governance, make sure that solutions are co-developed with community and not for the communities. And of course, leverage technologies, right? We are blaming and shaming technologies and AI, but if they're developed responsibly and ethically, we can really make sure that this progress or acceleration towards SDGs is not lost.
Right. That, I think, is a lot to unpack. And I'm glad you've really given us the broad context for how we can actually be dispelling gloom when we talk about the post-2030 agenda. Judith, I want to talk about the geography that you come from. Kenya is really the new hub for development discourse, especially with more UN agencies likely to move there. Being from that geography, how do you think that the voice of the Global South can be represented in the post-2030 agenda to drive it? And also, what could be the guiding principles for that agenda?
Indeed, and thank you, Sunaina. Kenya is recognized as the de facto hub for African development. And we currently host over 20 UN agencies and looking forward to having 3 others moving. That is UNICEF, UN Women, and UNFPA by, I think, 2026. And this is because Nairobi offers a unique combination in terms of geography. It's easily reachable, diplomacy, regional governance, and innovation hubs, and definitely our vibes.
That's right.
So I really love having this discussion because we are at a very critical junction. Even as we think around post-2030 and the 5 years that we have towards 2030, looking at where we are in terms of achievement of the SDGs, but then also anchoring on where we are to think beyond what needs to change, even as we rethink global goals. And this discussion comes at the right time. As we think about this, and even as we look post-2030, for me, the most important thing is for the Global South to take charge in formulating solutions or the way forward, in making the way forward for our development agenda. Because unless we do it ourselves, unless we anchor on what we know, unless we look inward and bring out our strengths and know that we have to chart the way forward, depending on what we do best, who we are best, and also on our values and principles, and not an outwardly thought process brought in, but rather in, think around it within ourselves and now channel that outward, we will not be able to, again, achieve much. So this calls for sovereignty of the global south, and therefore the process must be global south led. And if we do not do this, then it really is not bound to work. And it must be based on our lived realities, and through also ownership, by localization, collaboration, south to south in terms of learning, knowledge transfer, and looking at, because the issues we face across the global south are similar, just determined and defined by our geographies. Right. So, and we need to shift the frame from poverty elevation to sovereign development and dignity.
All right. And to do all of this, we will need funding. Mm-hmm. We have time for two quick follow-up questions to both of you. Alexandra, to you, I would ask, the annual shortfall in financing the SDGs is over $4 trillion annually. That is the figure that the UN had put out recently. Do we need to rewrite the rules of global finance, and where can we find the new sources of capital?
Yeah, well, that's this issue was actually a central theme of International Conference on Financing for Development that took place in Sevilla in July, and global leaders spent 4 days to debate it.
You can give us a summary.
I think what's interesting is that the financing gap is not decreasing, but it's increasing. So if you see the numbers that was given by UN and other agencies in 2015, the financing gap at that time was $2.5 trillion annually. And right now it's 3.5, even 4 by some sources. So the increase is 60%. Why is that? I mean, of course, COVID-19 had some role to play in it that led to regression of progress towards certain SDGs. Important to note is that main sectors that are lacking the financing, critical financing, is still clean energy, water and sanitation, infrastructure, telecommunications. So really, the basis for the development of other SDGs. So how do we find those $20 trillion in 5 years? Well, I'm not going to be very original in my reply. I think the global leaders in July already put forward some proposals, such as, reforming DPIs, making sure that also reforming credit rating agencies that right now are detrimental to low-income countries, and getting loans is very hard for them, but also tap into resources that are not still utilized, so remittances, for instance, or private philanthropies, and increase domestic resource mobilization, so focus on better taxation systems. But I think what is most important is the private sector. So if you see how many companies attended the international conference in Seville, I think it was only 25 companies. That's a very low number. So it really shows that private sector is disengaged from this system. And in my mind, we should make sure that it's really steps in, because this is where the money comes from. Right. So, incentives such as climate credits or blending finance systems could work at the time, but also shifting mindsets, right? So moving from more paternalistic approaches to partnership-based.
That's right. And I think the point that you raised about private capital is very important. I'm going to ask you a yes or no question. Of all of these ideas you have outlined, can we get there?
Well,
yes or no? That's all you have.
I hope so.
Okay, that's a good middle ground. We should hope. Judith, my final question to you. You work on gender equality, and we know that investing in women has multiplier effects on communities and on families. As we think of the post-2030 agenda, how do you think we should approach the goal of gender equality?
For starters, if we are to think gender equality, we must shift we must do a shift from why we invest in women to how we do it. And this needs to be more intentional, more structural, and more systemic, with women at the center and the core of it all. We must shift from empowerment to power, to giving them power. We must fund women as economic actors, not just beneficiaries. And this way we enable them to play a role in the economy. We must also invest in care economy as infrastructure. Remember, the care economy is run and funded by women. And then we must think of a gender-just climate action and strengthen women's collective voice. Women are the best at coming together to resolve the issues that affect them. So anchoring on their collective voice, then we can be able to do a lot more.
All right. That actually is very insightful. So thank you, Judith, and thank you, Alexandra. It has been a pleasure to have you join us in this session.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.